I talked about this briefly. I didn't talk about it extensively, mostly because a lot's been going on and also I'm terrible at my job. But the country's over. Sorry to let you know. Sorry to let you know like this. I know it's not very ceremonious. I'll just like, I guess there's no lead burying really. The media isn't talking about this. I'm not sure why. Probably because they hate you. Also, there's no way to cover it without sounding really, really alarmist. There are a few articles, but you're not going to see widespread discussion, which is interesting because it's probably the single most dangerous thing in the entire big, beautiful bill. They added a provision, very sneaky, last second provision to the big, beautiful bill. Now, remember how the Trump administration has petitioned to the Supreme Court the argument that federal injunctions shouldn't be allowed? Remember that? Now, remember how in the arguments of that case and in cases that followed, where the Supreme Court, like, validated pre-existing federal injunctions, it seems very likely that when the Supreme Court makes a ruling on that in probably late June, I think, it seems likely that they are not going to grant the request of the Trump administration. They're not going to make federal injunctions not a thing. In case you don't know, a federal injunction is how a federal judge keeps the government from doing something that is illegal. If a law is passed and somebody sues the government and says, "Ayo, this law violates our constitutional rights," a judge takes that case and then can issue a federal injunction to stop the government from doing that thing. The Trump administration has tried to get the Supreme Court to rule against federal injunctions. It's probably not going to. So this is their next attempt. Basically, they're trying to make federal injunctions impossible in the form of a budget provision. And what this essentially means is that pre-allocated budget funds that are handed out to federal judges and the courts in general, of course, they all receive money from the federal government. They're federal judges, they're federal courts. They cannot use that money to pursue contempt charges alongside, or if federal injunctions are not followed. Essentially, what this means is that if the government violates somebody's constitutional rights, very, very blatantly, like it could be a cop or ICE arrests a citizen and deports them to Sudan, and that's that, right? And they say, we're going to do that to all black people. They just say that, right? Well, normally a federal injunction would put a stop to it. But now, if a federal injunction is issued against that behavior, the judge, all judges, would not be able to allocate any resources to hold the government in contempt for not following the injunction. After all, the consequences of not following the injunction are to, you're held in contempt, which is a crime, and then the government can go after you, right? The judge can file up paperwork with the clerks. The judge can send marshals after you, but all of that takes money. And what this provision in this bill does essentially is say, nope, the money that is allocated via the pre-existing budget, which is all the money that you have, cannot be used in the furtherance of pursuing contempt charges if an injunction is violated. What this effectively means is that there would be no way for the judiciary to ever meaningfully enforce federal injunctions. It would erase the judiciary with regard to their ability to stop the government. What's more, and this is a particularly nefarious bit because it does get worse, believe it or not, the language in the House-passed bill would block federal judges from enforcing their contempt citations if they had not previously ordered a bond, a provision Republicans said was intended to discourage frivolous lawsuits by requiring a financial stake from those suing, meaning that even if the judges could somehow get funding to pursue contempt charges against people violating their federal injunction, they would not be allowed to do so unless the plaintiff in the case, the one who was suing the government, was issued a bond and put up money, potentially an enormous amount of money, because the purpose of the bond is restitution in case it turns out the federal injunction is unnecessary. So it's possible that in order for the government, the judiciary, to be able to do anything about a violation of the law from the federal government, you would have to pony up hundreds of thousands, millions, maybe, possibly more than single-digit millions, because the bond would need to be proportional to the potential harm of a revoked injunction. So only rich people can sue at all? Essentially, yes. And even the rich people who sue, if there is a federal injunction issued on their behalf, nothing can be done about it because the judge cannot allocate any resources in the pursuit of contempt charges. The government can do whatever they want. This bill essentially ends the judiciary. That's not an exaggeration. That's what it does. Like this in impact, it's essentially the Enabling Act. Yeah. This is it. But will the bill pass? It's already passed the House. It was in the big beautiful bill. It's essentially the Enabling Act. It completely nulls any judicial action against the government for any unconstitutional behavior. And you might be wondering, what happens if a case makes it to the Supreme Court? Because the Supreme Court doesn't issue federal injunctions. The Supreme Court makes rulings. Their power is above, right? Well, here's the thing. Cases only make it to the Supreme Court if they're appealed from lower courts. Usually, right? Like, normally what would happen would be somebody, either the government or a plaintiff, would lose the case in a federal court, it would get appealed, and the Supreme Court would choose whether or not to take the appeal. The Supreme Court would be the only institution left capable of stopping the federal government. So what happens if cases never make it to the Supreme Court? Like, let's say, for example, the federal government does something unconstitutional, right? Blatant violation of one's constitutional rights, and they're sued for it. And a federal judge says, yep, government's violating the law. We are issuing a national injunction. The federal government says, oh no, and then keeps doing that thing anyway, because there's no way to hold them in contempt. Funds can't be allocated for it. How would that ever make it to the Supreme Court? After all, the only way for it to go one level up to the Supreme Court would be for the loser in that case, the federal government, to appeal. Why would they do that? Why would they appeal it? They lost at the federal level, for which there are no consequences. Why would they appeal it, thus allowing it to go to the Supreme Court? Exactly. Yeah, no, it's actually over. It really is. It's not good. Vosh, in extreme cases, plaintiffs/prosecutors can directly appeal to the Supreme Court. Sure, and good luck doing that with every law the government's going to violate. Yeah, sometimes you can directly go to the Supreme Court. Sometimes. Does this mean they can ignore elections? Sure. After all, there's lots of stuff the federal government could do that would violate your constitutional rights to a fair election. What are you going to do about it? Issue a federal injunction? Yeah, good luck with that. You understand? Elections verified in Senate, not a court? Yeah, but the government has a lot of power in adjusting what the outcome of an election is going to be. It's not about whether or not they're verified by the Senate. It's about whether or not there are a million things the government does in the meantime that adjust the results. These are the changes the Senate is eyeing. Nothing about this is brought up. That's the thing. There are people talking about how Senate Republicans aren't going to verify this, but Senate Republicans' problems are with the budget, not with this. The Republican Party is unified in their interest of ending democracy. You know, that's not something they're arguing about. And again, nobody's bringing this up. But didn't the government already ignore the Supreme Court anyway? You're not understanding the scope and gravity of this, okay? This doesn't just allow the government to do illegal things. The government has always done illegal things. This structurally, baked into law, prevents the judiciary in its entirety from ever stopping or issuing contempt charges against the federal government. This ends the law. It's like asking the difference between, well, murder is illegal, but people still murder. Like, this would be revoking the illegality of murder. So that's pretty bad. Anyway, yeah, nobody's talking about this. I think a lot of Democrat media doesn't really understand the scope of it, or like the way they're talking about it. I mean, the New York Times article barely says anything at all. It's just like a rote description of what this does and what it could do without even explaining what the ramifications are of it, really. There's an Intercept article, which is much better, but it's also The Intercept, not exactly mainstream media. And funnily enough, a Newsweek article. I saw a few other small articles talking about this, but besides that, not really that much. The cool thing, by the way, is that the inability for judges to meaningfully enforce injunctions against the federal government for unconstitutional behavior would be retroactive too, because any injunctions pursued now would still pull from the existing budget, which is what's forbidden. Meaning that every single injunction ever issued at any point ever against the federal government in this administration or previous ones, all of them could be ignored. Everything. Would judges be able to set a 50-cent bond to circumvent this law? I mean, that wouldn't be a reasonable bond. But even, again, if they did, it wouldn't circumvent the law because they still wouldn't be able to use funds to pursue contempt charges. Couldn't they just do the injunctions without allocating resources? No. You can't enforce an injunction without allocating resources. You need clerks, you need marshals, you need people whose job it is to do that. Theoretically, a bond could be set high enough that it would cover the cost of going after the federal government. But do you have any idea how expensive that would be? Like, if the bond that is issued is high enough that it would allow for that, like the cost of contempt charges against the federal government, I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. Functionally, it makes it impossible. How is the Newsweek article on this significantly better than the New York Times article? I've been noticing that about Newsweek, by the way. Leaving aside their video content, a lot of their articles are actually significantly better written. They might be AI, I don't really know. But in terms of the content they have, New York Times is junk. Yeah, it's really, really bad. Like, I would actually say in many cases worse than the Daily Wire. Does this mean you can't enforce taxes at all anymore? No, I have no idea what you're talking about. What does this have to do with taxes? Does the bill need a simple majority in the Senate? Yep. It's a budget bill. Wouldn't the Supreme Court just shoot this bill down? Do you know how the government works? Because I can explain in roundabout ways for a while, but I don't think you're understanding the extent of this. Can the midterm change the bill? No, that's not how midterms work, or bills. If enacted, it would be a stunning restriction on the power of federal... Sometimes I do wonder if my ability to convey this information is hamstrung a bit by the education of my audience. Love and respect, by the way, to all of you. But like, I don't think a lot of you understand what this is, or what this is at, or what level this is. The Supreme Court has long recognized the contempt power is integral to the authority of the federal courts. Without the ability to enforce judicial orders, they are rendered mere advisory opinions which parties are free to disregard. Chemerinsky wrote that federal courts rarely require a bond to be posted by those, quote, who are restraining unconstitutional federal, state, or local government actions, as those seeking such orders do not have the resources to post a bond, and insisting on it would immunize unconstitutional government conduct from judicial review. Representative Joe Neguse? Probably Negose, a Colorado Democrat, said in an interview that the provision was added because the Trump administration is, quote, losing in virtually every court in the land. Dozens of lawsuits have been filed since Trump returned to office, challenging his executive orders and actions taken by his administration. Judges have partially or fully blocked the president at least 82 times, according to a tally by the Associated Press. Think we'll get any kind of change to the Constitution? Probably not. I don't really see what the need is when you can do stuff like this. The provision in the House bill would make all the court orders in these cases completely unenforceable. There would be no court orders against the Trump administration ever again, not meaningful ones. So do we know what's going to be passed in the Senate? No, we don't. We can't see the future. There's no reason to believe it won't be. It's possible that it won't be, but why do you think Republicans in the Senate would change it? The bill is stunning in its scope. It would apply to all temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, and even permanent injunctions ever issued in American history. Ever issued. Not familiar with the American processes, but I read there is a way single senators can exclude single items from budget bills if they are unrelated to budgeting. Overriding requires a 60-vote quorum. Is that something that that could happen? Well, this is a budgeting thing. That's the reason why it's framed the way that it is. It doesn't ban federal judges from issuing injunctions. It prohibits them from using allocated funds in order to pursue those injunctions. So it is like a budgetary bill. Of course, that's bullshit, but you know. Yeah, no kidding, man. This Newsweek article is so much better than the New York Times. This article has been updated to add commentary from Erwin Chemerinsky. That was good of them. I wish the New York Times did that. So there's literally no way to stop this. Are you a senator? Goth gamer girl. Are you a U.S. senator? Yeah, why? Oh! Well, get in there, Tiger. Luckily, I live in VA, and both our senators are staunchly against this. Well, It's a nationwide thing, so don't know how much that matters. I mean, I'm glad your senators are against it. I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make. Let's enjoy articles like this while we still can. Donald Trump suffers triple legal blow within hours. 3 legal defeats. Really? Federal judge rejected the administration's attempt to overturn the May 19th ruling that the Institute of Peace must return to the control of its original board. Executive order targeting Jennifer and Block was ruled unconstitutional. So, yep. Have fun reading articles like this while we still can, because very, very soon, articles like this will no longer matter. There will be no consequence to the injunctions. So could they start just segregating federal buildings again? No, because the Civil Rights Act is not a federal injunction. That's a law. That's different. Well, actually, I guess what they could just do is, if they wanted to, which they don't, but if they did want to, they could start segregating federal buildings, and then it would go to a judge, and the judge would say, that's obviously illegal. You can't do that. I'm issuing an injunction. And then Trump would be like, lol, comma, Lamau. And then they would just keep doing it. Yeah, they could. They can do anything they want, essentially, if this goes through. Yeah. Literally, yeah. It's because they can override any injunction effectively, and any law they break, the injunctions that follow could then be overridden. So yeah. Do you think this will have any effect on public opinion, given that it should be pretty easy to explain even to the median voter how this is a flagrant abuse of power? Do you see the media talking about it much? Let me look up on YouTube right now. Budget bill provision, federal injunctions. We'll see. I'm sure somebody's talking about it. Not nobody. Let's see. Ooh, that's not looking good. Not related. Not related. Not related. Keep in, I specifically said federal injunctions in what I searched. Not related. Not related. Not related. Not related. Not related. Key features might include it. 15K views from CBS. Put it in quotes. Nobody puts it in quotes. Tax bill advances, here's what to know. Might be related, but tax bill? Nope. AP stream? Nope. Last minute changes to Trump budget bill help to ensure passage in House. Maybe, not mentioned in the title. People also watched Why Genocide, Harvard. Okay, so yeah, there you go. I mean, listen, it's not whether or not people are talking about it. It's about whether or not people are seeing it. And they're not. That's not the discourse. I gotta say, though, the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP are nothing next to what this does to the judiciary. Doesn't quotes make it required in the results? Are you, respectfully, are you stupid? The point is, if you have to start quote searching to find the coverage isn't meaningful. That's the point. It's a bill going through the Senate. We're not looking to see if a news agency once talked about it. Okay, there should be billboards in Times Square on this. It's the end of the country. It's the Enabling Act. It's the end of the judiciary. Dog, I was just asking. You need to be focused on the big picture here. We found a Newsweek article, okay? Nobody's talking about this. Nobody gives a shit. How will this affect my stock portfolio? Probably not too well. It is basically the Enabling Act. The only difference being that it immunizes the executive from the judicial rather than the legislative. But in this case, the legislative doesn't do anything at all, basically. So it doesn't really matter. Maybe you should say what the Enabling Act is. The Enabling Act was the thing that Hitler did that I'm not a historian. It prevents the Weimar legislator from overriding him, right? Allowed the Reich government to issue laws without the consent of parliament. Yes. This Hitler guy seems very Trumpian. That's true. That's true. Even if you look it up, like you Google search it. Look at this, man. Look at what you get. You get articles from, in order, Just Security, Campaign Legal Center, Balls and Strikes, then finally Newsweek, the New York Times article is dog shit, ABA Journal, Axios. And by the way, a lot of these don't even they don't even really talk about like the it's not just talking about it. It's also like the relative threat level here is not being described. It's the end of the democracy functionally. Click the videos tab. We just did that. Why? It might be that the overwhelmingly liberal mainstream news industry just doesn't really know how to deal with information like this because they're so complacent. It might be that they've been explicitly told not to talk about it, or at least have that implied. Sorry, I don't really have a good closer to this. Whether or not it goes through the Senate is not a done deal. We don't know. It certainly seems likely that it will. Why would Republicans not? You could tell people to call their senators. Sure, but like, the Republicans have enough votes. Why would Republicans not vote for it? You know? Like, they want this. Like, you would essentially be asking, I mean, you're asking fascists who have been doggedly pursuing the end of checks and balances in the federal, like unitary executive theory, to politely, like, not do the big sweeping move that would give them infinite power. Tell them that it's not extreme enough. Tell them you're dissatisfied with this. It needs to completely gut the Supreme Court as well. Yeah, maybe. Why is the House more Hitlerite than the Senate? Because the House is full of people that always have to be campaigning. The Senate gets 6-year breaks, but if you're a House member, you're basically always campaigning. Fascism requires a constant state of hysteria. So the more you're immersed in campaign culture, the more likely it is that you're going to be like oorahing your way through it. That's why Trump's always campaigning.